Hello, and welcome to the 360 Method, a podcast where we chat about everything Autism 360. Each week, we'll be catching you up with what's going on in the program, chatting with team members, and talking all things mindset, as well as exploring relevant ideas that autism parents think about. This week, we're talking about education and schooling with our wonderful senior coach, Kim Alexander. Hello, Kim.
Hi, good morning, Ella. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, so excited to chat. Kim hails from sunny Queensland, Australia, and has been teaching kids with all kinds of disabilities for 35 years in mainstream settings. Could we get a richer just experience bank? I'm so excited. She's been working with Autism 360, doing coaching for 2 and a bit years, something like that, Kim?
Yep.
Yeah, and she leads our team of special education teachers, which is just super exciting. I'm so excited to have you. And I'm your host, Ella Bailey. I'm an Autism 360 veteran coach, explorer of all things parenting support. And before becoming an Autism 360 team member, I worked in psychological research and behavioral psychology. So welcome to you, our lovely listeners. We care about you and your thoughts and your experiences. So whether you're a program member or not, we would love to hear from you. Please drop us a line at hello@autism360.com. We would love your feedback and questions. I'm sure you'll have lots of interesting questions for Kim. So please do pop them into an email and we'll be sure to nab her again and get her back on. So before we start, I want to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, on whose land I live and work, and from where this podcast is being broadcast today. And also make the disclaimer that this podcast does not substitute for medical advice. If you have concerns about yourself or about a loved one, please do seek medical or allied health professional support. Kim, autistic kids and schooling. It's a big, meaty one, isn't it?
It is. It is a real, can of worms, I suppose. There's no one answer for anything. You have someone says, oh, yes, I've worked with an autistic child in a school before. And you go, yeah, that might help, but it could be very different. So, yeah.
It could be. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think, that old saying that when you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. When you've supported one autistic person in school, you've supported one autistic person in school, haven't you?
Very much so, yes.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, we've got a few questions that we can chat through that have come from the parent group. But one of the main kind of broad questions that I thought we would start off with is just, what do you think that autistic kids need in a school environment most of all? Kind of big picture, 10,000-foot view.
Okay. The nice, easy one to start
exactly.
with. Yeah. Exactly. Okay, right. Not a problem. I think in the main, I think what it is understanding that what our kids are doing, how our kids are behaving is not something that they're doing to get on your nerves, annoy you, do whatever. It is something that is part of their disability, if you want to use those terms, that they have. I was speaking to a father the other day who has a daughter who is on autism spectrum. However, he also has a daughter who has Down syndrome. And he said to me, he feels that autism now is where Down syndrome was 30 years ago in the understandings of people. People now have a broader understanding of Down syndrome. They understand, the types of things our kids can do. They understand how to support kids with Down syndrome in society, in schools, but they don't yet have that understanding around autism because people don't think that they don't believe they've been exposed to autistic people. It's seeming to be, it's seeming to come out of the woodwork, but it's not. Our kids have been around. We just haven't been diagnosing them, or we haven't been responding to their needs. So I think it's understanding is the big one. And saying this, you've got to realise that many people don't realise that they're talking to autistic people, don't realise that they're dealing with autistic people. If you've worked in a university, I can guarantee you that, 90% of those people are on the spectrum. And it's quite odd sometimes working in schools. I even found that many of the teachers who said, but I don't understand why they don't understand. I'm thinking, yeah, probably because you're autistic too, but that's okay. So yeah, I think understanding is the big one, getting a bit of a handle on it and getting people to educate themselves a little bit about autism, because as you say, meeting one autistic person is not understanding autism. That's just meeting one autistic person and getting that one view sort of thing.
That's such an interesting social comparison to make in terms of the understanding that's been developed around kind of education and Down syndrome, and then education and autism. I mean, was he making the comparison in terms of the type of development that can happen over a course of sort of 30 years of understanding?
Yes, I think that's what he was saying. He was saying, there's so much more, the doors are so much more open now for his daughter with Down syndrome. They don't seem to be the same for his daughter with autism. His daughter with Down syndrome, he said, the whole society, they're invited to things because of the fact that she's got Down syndrome, and they accept the fact that she's got Down syndrome. Whereas his daughter with autism, who comes to something and has a meltdown, they don't get invited back. It's like, oh, that was too hard to handle. So he's just sort of saying the doors seem to be wider open for his daughter with Down syndrome than they do with autism, which is an interesting statement, isn't it, to sort of say that?
Well, it's interesting because, I mean, for me, what it indicates is the difference in social development and understanding around visible disabilities and invisible disabilities, right?
Definitely.
Like when there's something that you can visually process to help you understand how that person might identify, that makes it easier for people who maybe felt like they didn't understand before, but now they can, and that sort of thing. Speaking of access, there's been a lot of, and you sent me an article yesterday, which I thought was just totally on point. There's been a lot of chat in, well, I guess kind of the zeitgeist and a lot in the media about kids doing what's called quote unquote school refusal, which is, I mean, the term itself is probably worth a discussion, but it's seeming like we're hearing a lot more about kids doing something called school refusal, that there's an increase. It seems like every second kid is quote unquote school refusing. What's your thoughts? What does the term mean?
Yep.
Go for gold.
The term itself is a bit problematic, I think, because I do believe that our kids aren't school refusing. I do believe that it's an avoidance thing, and an avoidance in as much as the way that they avoid other sensory things. I do believe it's an overload for them. And if you think about what our society has been through in the last few years, there's a lot of people who are overloaded, and our kids are just acting it out. It's part of anxiety. It really is. And I think that they're not wanting to. It's lots of the kids that I deal with that have this are actually not saying they don't want to go to school. They say, I can't go to school. And they use that phrase. They say, I can't go to school. It's too hard. Or I've got one child that I'm dealing with who gets dressed in the morning, puts his uniform on, and then can't get out the door. Now that's a child who is not just refusing to go to school. He's actually wanting to go to school. He wants to see his friends, but he just can't do it. And it seems to be some of the figures that are coming up are saying that they believe there's between a 5 and 15% increase in this in our schools, which is a bit scary. It's something that already the education department are realizing they're going to have to deal with in a different way. It's not a kid saying, I don't feel like going to school today. It's a child who's saying, I can't go to school today.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? And I think you were making a comment earlier off mic about, well, we're also seeing a lot of adults who really feel like they can't go back to the office post-COVID, and that they can't, or they're having trouble re-engaging socially, or that feels less natural. It feels more tiring than it did before, and that sort of thing. And I wonder if that's just part of the same overwhelm, but that we don't have the same, or we don't have a word for. We're office refusing.
Yes, office refusing. We've got a new one refusing.
I mean, Autism 360 was online and totally digital since before COVID, but if they tried to make us go into an office, I would office refuse too.
Exactly. And that's it. We see this in lots of people. Lots of people aren't how many people now do online shopping? How many people do things now remotely that they used to do in person, because it all got too hard during COVID, and now it all still feels too hard, and so they don't go back to it. So why are we saying to our kids, well, hang on, school's open, get back in there and get on with it?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, what are some broad strategies that you've used before with kiddos who are struggling with getting back to school, or parents who are looking for support? Do you get that much on your caseload?
Quite a lot. And I think a lot of the times I say to parents again, it's not a refusal, it's an avoidance. How would you deal with any other avoidance or sensory overload or whatever? And we talk about breaking down the task. So, for example, one of the children I've dealt with, when we were looking at him going back to school, we did it in small increments. He engaged with school online first off. He chatted with some of the teachers. He chatted with different people. We even did mum driving into the school car park, but just with him in the car and, how do you feel? Are you okay? Let's go through those sorts of things. What's your anxiety around? Then just getting him to drop something off to the school office. So his homework was dropped off to the school office rather than, pushing him to go in. He came in one time and did some work in the staff room rather than going down to classroom. So breaking it down, doing a task analysis of it is sometimes a good idea, and saying, okay, what bits can you do? And also, after they've done something like that, realizing that they're going to be exhausted or they're going to be overwhelmed, and saying, okay, what can we do now to balance that up, to give them their spoons back?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's interesting you've broken the task up into not just the kind of physical steps, but also the emotional steps, the sensory steps, and everything else that might be going into whatever it is that's making it hard for that kid to get back into school. Let's break each domain down into steps. Yeah. Sorry, you go.
Even just getting the child to put his uniform on, that took nearly 2 weeks.
Wow, tricky. How's that kiddo doing now?
Getting there. We're getting there. Yeah. But I mean, it's all a matter of, sometimes it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back, or vice versa. But just if we break it down, and if we also realize that we're dealing with something that's actually an overwhelming anxiety type of thing, you wouldn't push someone into something that's going to make them anxious in one go. You wouldn't say, well, here you go, I'm dropping you at school gate, see you later. Right. Because you know what's going to happen. So let's do it in small steps.
It's going to be really unfun and traumatic for everybody involved, isn't it? Yeah. Speaking of the struggles, I have a lot of clients at the moment whose kiddos and not all autistic kiddos need this, but kiddos who need consistency and routine and structure to help them cope, they're really struggling with the staff inconsistencies. So I don't know, this is just anecdotal, but it seems like Melbourne is really struggling at the moment. I mean, everywhere is really tricky, but it seems like Melbourne is kind of disproportionately struggling with teacher shortages at the moment. And kids are just having a lot more changes in staffing, classes being collapsed into each other, inconsistency in routines and things that used to help kids cope with school are now no longer available or now can't be relied upon. Do you see this? Do you have any tips around this? What are your thoughts?
It is huge. And the emotional impact of COVID on teachers was huge too. It wasn't just the teachers, being told you have to be vaccinated and get into school or whatever. From my point of view, I was teaching during that time. We weren't even being informed what was happening with COVID. We were watching the 10 o'clock news to find out what was happening next with regard to what education was going to be doing. We weren't getting any information. The day that they announced that schools will be closing in Queensland, where I am, it came across on the 10 o'clock news before we were told about it. So teachers were severely impacted, and it has impacted a bit, I suppose. We've got teachers who are like school refusing, but they're not going back. So there is a huge shortage of teachers in the schools, and this is the flow-on effect to the schools is quite critical. The government are already looking at what they can do, but the thing is that our kids are having to cope with it whilst they're looking at what they can do. So a lot of times I say to the parents, okay, it might be that the school, like you say, classes are being collapsed, this is happening. What is the one constant in the school? Is there the library lady? Is she always there? Is there, the deputy principal? Are they always there? Who's the person that your child can touch base with or do a check-in with or something that is always there? Look for that person and try and set up some sort of system with this person. And it's quite often the library lady or one of the older teacher aides or something like that the child can then do a check-in with, have some rapport with, know that person is going to be there, even if their classroom teacher is not going to be there. The other thing I have set up with some of my senior students, or my parents with senior students, is that there's a system in place that if they get to a class and it's an unknown teacher, they have the right to say, okay, well, I can't work in that classroom today. I need to go and work in, the resource room or the wherever it is. And that's been set up well and truly beforehand, so that it's not they just absconded. No, that was the thing. Okay, and I've actually even had one school that was really great. They would actually send the person an email, teach mum an email in the morning, say Mrs. So-and-so is away for maths or whatever, and the child would then talk with mum, and they would say, okay, well, during maths, where are you going to go? I'm going to go to here. And so setting up systems in place beforehand is great. I know sometimes it doesn't happen. You turn up at school and the teacher's not there, but having a constant person in the school can also help too. So that child goes and checks in with Mrs. So-and-so, and she can say, oh, your teacher's away today, but you've got Miss So-and-so, you had her a couple of weeks back or whatever. That can help settle the situation too.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess there's two strategies there, isn't it? Like giving whatever prior notice you can, whatever is available, then seeking out what are your constant options, and using both of those together to create some sort of predictability and anxiety soothing strategies. Amazing. And I mean, this is as good a time as any to bring up a question that a lot of my parents come to me with, which is, say your kid does need that, but school can't or won't get on board with the kind of support that your kid needs. I mean, you must see this all the time, right? Yeah, it's a struggle, isn't it? It's really a struggle. And I guess sometimes in allied health, it can feel a little bit like we're butting heads with schools. They're not able to give us what we need in terms of supporting our kids or what we know works. What do we do?
It is a really tricky one. And I feel that as parents and us supporting the parents, one of our roles is either to advocate for our child or educate. And a lot of times we need to do both of those. We need to advocate for them, but we also need to educate the person we're talking to. So, for example, you say, my child needs fidget tools. If we walk in there saying, here, my child needs to have this, and it's called a fidget toy, the teacher's going to go, well, hang on, I've got 28 other kids in my class. What do you want me to do? And the kid's going to throw this around or do whatever. And they're going to go, yep, great, put it in the drawer, and the kid's not going to have access to it. If you can educate that teacher around why the child needs it, how, when they're going to need it, what they're going to use it for, then the teacher is more likely to say, oh, yeah, that's okay. They can have that. They, it stays in their desk. They only get it out when they do whatever or something like this. I often say to the parents, it's like saying, the visually impaired child can't have their glasses for our kids. So, they need the chair bands, they need the wobble stool, they need the whatever. But sometimes teachers in the hubba of what's going on in their world, they just think, here's a parent saying they need to have these things, and it's just going to be one more thing with this child who's already wiggly and disrupting my classroom. You tell me they need a wobbly stool? For goodness sakes, this is bizarre. So again, educating the teacher is really good. If you can get an OT or a professional to send a little note along around, this is, how we've been using it in our therapy sessions or whatever. Or you can let them listen to some podcasts. Say to the teachers, hey, I heard this really great podcast, or I saw this really great article, or I saw this really great, thing, and share that with them. That's really good. And teachers, look, they do want to understand. It's just that in their world, sometimes you coming in with, and I do remember a parent came in, she had brought in the pop-up tent, all the fidget tools, the chair bands, the this, the that, dumped them on the teacher's desk and said, he needs these, and wondered why the teacher went, yeah, nah. So over a few weeks, we educated the teacher and things happened for that kid. So advocate, but also educate. I think that's sort of one of my big things there.
Yeah, totally. And I think one of the things that I always try to work with parents to use as a tool in their tool belt to get school on board is to understand from the teacher's perspective, what do they need to know that's relevant to them? Teachers are so busy and time pressured, and they've got a lot on their plate, and they're full of information, and they've got 28 kids and whatever. What are the important pieces of information the teacher needs quickly and at the right time? And how can you get that teacher the information they need without what they don't need. And how can you give the piece of information to the teacher? I'm like so showing my my psych perspective here. I'm like, what's the teacher's motivation? How can we give them the information they need based on their motivation? So if your teacher is motivated by a quiet, calm classroom, give them the information that's going to help them to understand from their perspective, okay, if you want a quiet, calm classroom, then these are how you support Jimmy to feel regulated so that, you know, you don't feel as though he's disrupting, etc. Work with your teacher's motivation, not against it.
Exactly. One of the things too that I often say to parents is and especially when like coming this time of the year, moving into lots of children are starting school or changing schools, I talk about writing up a one-page profile sheet on your child. So a one-page profile sheet, basically saying, hi, I'm so-and-so. This is the things I really enjoy. So I'm into Lego and Minecraft and whatever. These are the things that might trigger me or upset me. And here's some of the ways that I can calm down with those sorts of things. And then I write it get them to write it as a letter to the teacher. Please help me with, being a good student in your class, or please help me to operate in your class. And just a one-page quick thing that the teachers can have. It can be left there for another relief teacher coming in. It can go to, music teachers or whatever. They can have a copy of it as well so that they know a bit about that child. And then, if the child is having a bit of a rough time, they can kind of have a bit of a quick glance at it. Oh gosh, okay, he doesn't like it when we do whatever, or he doesn't like sitting next to so-and-so. Okay, let's change that. Or he does like Lego. Let's say to him, hey, what was the last Lego thing you built? And sort of distract the child. But that one-page profile can actually be a savior a lot of times. And like you say, it can motivate the teacher. If you say, I'm going to help you have a nice, lovely time with me, well, then, here's some of the things. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. I use I think I took it from your example back in the day, but I use a cheat sheet model, a sort of student names cheat sheet. And then I do strengths, struggles, and strategies. And that's it. Just dot points under each of those so that if our kid is having a really tricky time, a teacher can at a glance have some information to help them manage that situation, to support that student the best they can. And you're right in terms of the changing out of staff and that sort of thing. Something that's going to be easy for them to digest, just have the information they need on our kid. It's going to be delightful. We've got a parent question. Kai from Alice Springs asks, I can't get my child's teacher on board with sensory regulation strategies. Oh my gosh, how many times have you heard this?
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. If I had $1 for every time. But, with sensory regulation strategies that I know work at home, any suggestions for getting them to try my strategies?
And again, it comes back to that sort of, the advocate and educate kind of thing. And look, what works for your child. I would say, see if we can get some sort of appointment to meet with the teacher, and don't. I know this sounds bad, but don't try and meet with them in the doorway as they're going in, taking their class in. That's not a good time for teachers. It's also not a good time straight away in the afternoon when they're trying to get the kids out the door, because they're probably running off to a staff meeting or something else, or something they've got organised. So it's, send a little email, say, look, I'd really love to chat with you about something. Is there a good time that we can meet, and make a time? When you go in, and I know this sounds a bit convoluting, but go in with the sandwich technique. So basically go in with look, I really love how you've been supporting my child and doing this and doing blah, 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 and that he's feeling so comfortable in your classroom. Then throw in the meaty bit. But I've realized that at home, when he's doing so-and-so, these strategies work, or these sensory things work for him. Would it be okay to just maybe trial a couple of these in the classroom with you for the next little while, and then finish off again with the sandwich technique with, look, I so appreciate you taking your time to see me today. It's really wonderful. And, you're such a supportive teacher, and we'll try, if we've tried these things, we'll catch up again soon and find out how we're going to go with them. Like, what do you think? And I've had many, many parents come back to me and say, oh, it was hard, but I tried that sandwich technique. I tried that sort of, rather than going and saying, this is what my kid needs, saying, support, blah, blah, blah. And they'd come back saying, yeah, I've got my foot in the door now. The teacher's going to try those things. And I said, that's great. Let's go from there. So maybe that's what Kai needs to do, set up a time to have a chat with her teacher. And, and go in there and again, be supportive of the teacher in as much as, that teacher may not be aware of how these things might be going to help that child and make a difference for that child.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's funny. So I gave a couple of uni lectures earlier this week on neurodiversity and disability. And to the cohort that I was giving lectures to, I sort of asked at the beginning of the lecture, what degrees are you all doing? Tell me what your backgrounds are, that sort of thing. And there was a lot of education students, a lot of students going out there in the world to be teachers. And and I know obviously such a psych here, but I'm just like, they didn't know what the social or medical models of disability were. They'd never heard of neurodiversity. So I guess just don't assume that your teacher will know and understand. Give them a little bit of background if possible. And again, that educate and advocate model is key here, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah, I think that's it. And I think, you do, what is it? You get more flies with honey or something or other, or softly catch the monkey, any of those sorts of, those old phrases that we used to use. Don't go in trying to say, okay, this is what you need to do. Go in saying, how can I go in as a parent saying, how can I help you, have a good time with my child? Look, I realize that, you might be having a bit of a struggle with, how can I help you? These are some of the things that work for me, or these are some of the things the therapist suggested for me. It's always good to bring in a professional's name. It's not just me saying it. The therapist have suggested these things. Then quite often the teacher goes, oh, okay, well, let's give it a try, see how it goes. But I do know, like from a teacher perspective, having a teacher say to me one time, well, if I've got to put chair bands on one chair, well, I'll have to put them on everybody's chair. I went, not everybody needs them. Not everybody wants them. I said, occasionally you might have a spare chair that you could say, yes, this is a special chair. If you want to sit on that one, you can have a go on it. I said, but, kids aren't going to want to gravitate to that. But the chair bands on a chair for one of our kids that needs to fiddle their legs or do whatever all day is going to make a difference for that child, and they are going to seek that out because they're going to need that input sort of thing. So it's a changing world, like I said in the start. I don't think we've got there yet with people understanding autism and what they need, and that the fact that they need these sensory things. It's not they just, oh, let's give them these things and there's shops out there that sell it or whatever. They actually need them. They need them like the child with the visual impairment. They need them like the child with the hearing impairment needs their aids. Our kids need their aids as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for coming and chatting with me. I just love getting to chat with you, Kim.
I hope it was informing. I hope it was, interesting for people.
Yeah, absolutely. And remember, if you're listening to this and you feel like, oh my gosh, I would love to pick Kim's brain further, shoot us an email. I can grab Kim and she can come back on and answer some more questions. The email is hello@autism360.com. And we will be back next week with another topic that's, interesting and relevant and to autism parenting specifically. So thank you for joining us this week with Kim. Thank you, Kim.
Thank you.
And until next week, Think 360.